In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on March 4th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Texas versus Arkansas. Texas and Arkansas walking into early March with something real on the line feels like college hoops the way people remember it. One side comes in as a new kid in the conference, Texas sitting around 18-11 overall and 9-7 in league play, still trying to convince everyone that this first year in the Southeastern Conference should end with its name called on Selection Sunday. The other side, Arkansas, has put together a stronger body of work at 21-8 and 11-5, sitting in the rankings and treating this last home date like a dress rehearsal for the madness that comes after the conference tournaments. Bud Walton Arena turns that kind of matchup into something closer to a cauldron than a court. The sound wraps around opponents and it usually tilts the little 50-50 moments toward the Razorbacks. Honestly, this kind of stage is where you find out which team really embraces chaos and which one just tries to manage it. That is part of why the market has them favored by a healthy margin, because odds makers know that in this building the crowd often becomes the extra defender, the extra screener, and sometimes even the extra burst of energy in the final 4 minutes. Texas has shown it can punch above its weight on the road, stealing wins in some tough gyms, but for every impressive night there has been another where the Longhorns get stretched out, fall behind a fast-paced offense, and spend the rest of the game chasing shadows instead of setting the tone. Arkansas thrives in exactly that kind of chaos. It loves to push the ball, stack possessions, and turn one made 3 into a 12-2 run before the visiting bench even has time to reach for the whiteboard. The style clash is pretty clear. Texas prefers a bit more structure and a more measured tempo, while Arkansas leans on waves of pressure, quick decisions, and the kind of energy that feeds on a crowd that has been tailgating all afternoon. In matchups like this, the slower team sometimes drags things into its comfort zone, but in Fayetteville, it is usually the Razorbacks who dictate pace, and when they do, covering a favorite number often becomes a matter of simply sustaining the storm they start in the first 10 minutes. The emotional angle also matters. This is a home finale, a chance for Arkansas to send its fans home buzzing, and groups in that spot rarely settle for squeaking by when they can make a statement against a name-brand opponent that has shared a long history with them. Putting all of that together, from the contrasting road and home personalities to the way Arkansas tends to stretch leads once it smells momentum, the side that looks more likely to not just win but to push clear of the number is the one wearing red in front of its own fans. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arkansas Razorbacks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. These two teams have spent most of the season playing games that rarely feel calm for long. Arkansas games in particular usually look like track meets and sneakers. The Razorbacks score in bunches, give up their share on the other end, and the final numbers often land in that territory where both fan bases feel like they got a full night of entertainment for the price of admission. Texas is not exactly shy either. Its offense has been comfortable living in the 80s on plenty of nights, and its defense has had enough wobbles that opponents are not being held to old-school grinder scores very often. Here is the thing, totals that look big on paper sometimes are not big enough when both teams are fully committed to running and trading shots. Look back over recent outings for both groups and there is a pattern of totals that stretch well into the 140s, 150s, and even surge into the 170s when games get loose or when late fouls and free throws pile onto what was already a lively pace. That is not just random noise, it is what happens when two offenses that like early clock looks and downhill attacks meet defenses that are more about creating turnovers and running than about suffocating every possession. Styles like that tend to create those long stretches where nobody can really get a stop. One team hits a 3, the other responds in 8 seconds, and suddenly a 10-point swing has happened before anyone has taken a deep breath. In a rivalry setting with postseason stakes and a loud building, players usually lean into that rhythm rather than away from it. Nobody wants to be the one dribbling out the shot clock while the crowd is begging for a push. Even if there are a few cold spells, the way these teams trade runs and the way modern college offenses emphasize spacing and three-point shooting means the scoreboard can climb in a hurry, especially if the final minutes turn into a parade to the foul line. So while the number that bookmakers have posted is not small and will scare some people away at first glance, the overall scoring profile and style of both sides suggest a game that is more likely to keep racing than to suddenly slam on the brakes. That makes the expectation tilt toward a script where the total has a better chance of finishing above that projection than stalling out underneath it. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Northern Kentucky versus Oakland. Northern Kentucky walks into this matchup with that dangerous blend of confidence and irritation that only comes from losing to the same team twice in the same season and knowing you had chances in both games. Those two meetings with Oakland were not blowouts. They were the kind of games where a handful of possessions swing everything, one finishing 5 points apart and the other by 11, and that matters when you are talking about a spread rather than a straight-up result. Familiarity is working in Northern Kentucky's favor now because they have already seen Oakland's quirky defensive looks, the way the Golden Grizzlies bait you into quick shots, and they have already tested how their own spacing and ball movement hold up over 40 minutes. Northern Kentucky's profile all year has been that of an aggressive, attacking team, more than comfortable playing fast but still organized enough to keep their structure on the road. The Norse have been living in the 80s offensively on the stat sheet, while still giving themselves room to pressure the ball and create turnovers, which is a big deal against an Oakland group that can get a little casual with the rock when they are feeling good at home. The numbers back up that vibe, with Northern Kentucky sitting in that better-than-average scoring tier nationally and also ranking among the national leaders in steals per game, which quietly translates into those cheap transition buckets that are absolute gold when you are catching points. Oakland, for all its offensive firepower, has shown a real tendency to let teams hang around, and not just in box scores but in real game flow. Runs come easily for the Golden Grizzlies, but so do lapses, and once a team has seen that script twice already, like Northern Kentucky has, it becomes much easier to stay steady when the crowd gets loud and Oakland inevitably strings together a quick 8-0 burst. Northern Kentucky has already survived those waves this season, taken them in the chest, steadied themselves, and kept contact until deep in the second half, which is exactly the kind of experience you want from an underdog that simply needs to keep this within shouting distance. There is also the psychological side that does not show up in any spreadsheet. Oakland is at home again, with the public eye on them, coming in with a record slightly above break-even and a reputation as one of the more entertaining offenses in the horizon, and that usually nudges the market in their direction. Northern Kentucky, sitting at 18-13 on the season and 10-10 in league play, slides neatly into that annoying underdog role that coaches secretly love, because every huddle can be framed as they still do not respect you. That chip on the shoulder matters when you are getting points and do not actually need the outright win for your ticket to cash. Tactically, Northern Kentucky is built for this kind of spot. They pressure passing lanes without completely selling out their rim protection, and that blend can frustrate an offense like Oakland's that thrives when the ball zips freely side to side and into shooting pockets. If the Norse turn just a few of those pretty passes into deflections and runouts, they not only create easy scoring chances, they also force Oakland into more half-court possessions, where Northern Kentucky's familiarity with the sets pays off. It does not take a miracle for an underdog to cover here. It just takes that steady, stubborn version of Northern Kentucky that limits their own empty trips and leans into their defensive activity. As our first pick for this matchup, the Northern Kentucky Norse to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Both of these teams are completely comfortable living in high possession games. Both have offenses that can get to 80 or more when things click, and both have defenses that, while capable of stops, are not exactly built to strangle the life out of opponents. The first two meetings were not track meets from the opening tip, but they still produced plenty of scoring swings, long stretches where each side traded buckets, and that is the kind of rhythm that tends to resurface when teams see each other for a third time. Northern Kentucky's offensive identity is pretty straightforward and pretty fun. They push the ball off misses, they are not shy about taking threes early in the clock, and they have enough creation on the perimeter to force defensive rotations, which in turn open cuts and offensive rebounds. That style feeds into runs, both good and bad, and it pulls the pace along almost regardless of what the opponent wants. Even when the Norse lose, they usually drag the game into a tempo that produces plenty of points because their best version of themselves is not a grinded-out slugfest. It is a flowing, aggressive offense that accepts the risk of giving some points back the other way. Oakland mirrors that in its own way. The Golden Grizzlies have been one of the more explosive scoring teams in their conference, sitting in that same high-scoring tier nationally, and they rarely look uncomfortable when the scoreboard starts climbing. They move the ball well, they shoot it confidently, and they are perfectly willing to trade early clock jumpers for the chance to build momentum in front of their home crowd. The catch, of course, is that their defensive profile has not been nearly as pretty, with opponents also living comfortably in the 70s and 80s against them, which is exactly the recipe you want when you are thinking about a points-heavy game. The fun part here is how the styles mesh. Northern Kentucky's pressure and willingness to gamble in passing lanes can absolutely spark fast breaks, but when those gambles miss, they leave Oakland with numbers, and Oakland is not the type of team to waste an advantage in space. So you get these little mini-games inside the main game, where a risky defensive play turns into a quick three the other way, and then suddenly everyone is running, the crowd is buzzing, and coaches are burning timeouts just to slow the chaos. Those pockets of chaos are usually where overs come to life because the clock barely moves and the points pile up in bunches. There is also the simple math of familiarity. By the third meeting, both coaching staffs know which sets bother the other, which matchups they like to attack, and which counters have already been shown on film. That level of scouting often helps the offenses just as much as the defenses because the players walk onto the floor with a clear idea of where the soft spots are and where to cut or spot up once the first action breaks down. When the ball is in the hands of players who already know the answers to the test, you tend to see cleaner possessions, better shot quality, and just enough defensive fatigue to turn those good looks into real damage on the scoreboard. Game flow matters a ton for a total, and this one has plenty of routes to a high number. If Northern Kentucky is playing from behind, they will keep pushing tempo and hunting threes, which naturally inflates possessions. If Oakland falls behind, their own response historically has been to lean even harder into their offense rather than squeezing the game, trusting that they can outscore almost anyone when they get rolling. Either script favors points, and in a matchup with two confident, offense-first identities and defenses that have been generous all season, it makes more sense to trust the buckets than the stops. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Milwaukee versus Detroit Mercy. Tournament basketball hits a little different when it lands in your own gym. Callahan Hall suddenly feels loud again, and this matchup drops right into that buzz with Detroit Mercy stepping in as the team that finally has something to protect at home. Detroit Mercy walks into this one with a 15-14 overall record and a 12-8 mark in league play, which looks a lot better when you remember they were stuck on a single win not long ago. It feels like a program that climbed out of the basement and then kept going, stacking credibility week by week instead of just catching one lucky season. The same school that used to play in front of empty seats now has a crowd that actually leans forward when there is a loose ball, because they know this version of the Titans is not just trying to survive, it is trying to make a statement. The coaching piece matters too. A second-year head coach like Mark Montgomery is not just managing rotations, he is managing a story, and this story flipped from frustration to belief once those wins started coming. You can almost picture the film sessions, with players seeing proof of who they are now instead of reminders of what went wrong before. That seeps into everything, from how hard guys sprint back on defense to how confidently they attack a matchup they have already handled. On the other side, Milwaukee has been grinding through a very different kind of journey. The record sits at 12-19 overall and 8-12 in league play, which tells you plenty about how many nights have ended with them walking back to the locker room shaking their heads. The Panthers have had stretches where it looked like they were patching things together with duct tape, trying to hold a season in place that kept wanting to slide away. There is effort, there is toughness, but there has also been that familiar feeling of being just a possession or two short of turning the corner. Stylistically, Milwaukee under Bart Lundy has often leaned into a whirlwind kind of game, where pace and chaos can be their friends. This year has felt a bit more like a tug of war, with that energy still there but not always rewarded on the scoreboard. When a team lives most of its year below the break-even line, it becomes harder to trust its poise in the exact kind of high-leverage environment this game represents. Then you look at what has already happened when these two have seen each other, and it paints a pretty clear picture. Detroit Mercy went into Milwaukee earlier in the season and came out with a win by a margin that left very little to argue about, 76-63. Later, back in Callahan Hall, the Titans handled a very different style of game, a more free-flowing, high-scoring battle that ended 91-86. One matchup tilted toward control and composure, the other tilted toward trading haymakers, and yet in both settings Detroit Mercy found the answers late. That is not a fluke pattern. That is a sign that this particular pairing leans in favor of the team wearing the home colors and carrying the cleaner record. When a favorite has already beaten the same opponent in both gyms, once by comfortably shutting the door and once by surviving a shootout, it becomes easier to trust that group to handle the emotional weight of a tournament game. The Titans score a little more, rebound a little better, and walk into their own building knowing the last chapters of this matchup went their way, which makes it very believable that they can win by the sort of gap that matters for the number. As our first pick for this matchup, the Detroit Mercy Titans to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Neither of these teams is built to crawl through possessions and squeeze the air out of the ball, which is great news if you enjoy watching the scoreboard operator stay busy. Detroit Mercy sits in that zone where it scores in the high 70s on an average night and gives up a very similar amount, which tells you plenty about the kind of rhythm they prefer. They push, they attack, and they are perfectly willing to live with some trade-offs at the other end if it means keeping the pace up. Milwaukee lives in a very similar neighborhood, putting up mid to high 70s and allowing right around that same band. That is the statistical fingerprint of two groups that are comfortable in open floor environments and are not obsessed with turning every possession into a slow half-court puzzle. Tempo numbers back that feeling up. Detroit Mercy plays at a pace that sits on the quicker side of the national middle, roughly low 70s in possessions per game, which is fast enough that any stretch of trading buckets can snowball quickly. Milwaukee has also shown a willingness to run, especially earlier in the year, with possessions floating in that same up-tempo range before league play and a few bumps nudged things slightly downward. Even when they were not at their most efficient, the Panthers did not look like a team that wanted to slog through games in the low 60s in possessions. Head-to-head results this season give us something even more concrete. The first meeting finished at 76-63, which lands in a perfectly healthy scoring range. The second tossed subtlety aside and ended 91-86, which is the kind of box score that makes the overcrowd grin. Stack those together and you get a combined scoring average in the high 150s across their two clashes. So in real games, in this same season, with these same coaches and styles, they have already played to a level of scoring that sits comfortably above a typical projected total for a matchup like this. Tournament context usually nudges things even further in that direction. A win or go-home setting encourages quick trigger threes, aggressive drives, and very little interest in working the clock when a team feels even slightly behind. Late in the second half, if one side is chasing, you get the familiar parade of intentional fouls, extra possessions, and those strange sequences where 20 points appear in 3 minutes. Both defenses have had their share of leaky stretches all season, living more on the side of good enough if we score plenty, rather than lock everything down and grind this out. When you combine that with coaches who know their teams are more comfortable in rhythm than in a rock fight, the most natural script is one where the game breathes, shots keep flying, and the final number creeps past the line that was set before tip. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Duquesne versus Rhode Island. This matchup drops Duquesne into Kingston as the team that has to walk in, shake off the crowd, and still play its own game while the number quietly leans toward Rhode Island at home without giving them much breathing room either way. It is one of those spots where the line feels like it is shrugging, almost asking which identity you trust more over 40 minutes. Duquesne brings the louder, more free-flowing offense, living around 80 points per game and giving up about 76, which is not exactly shy basketball. Their whole personality leans into space and tempo, with almost half of their shots coming from deep and a pretty healthy mid-30s clip from three that punishes any defense that is a step late or a closeout short. It looks a bit like that pickup group that runs the floor, hunts the arc, and keeps you under pressure even after a made basket, because they are right back in your face pushing the next possession. Rhode Island, on the other hand, plays more like the veteran group that wants to slow things down, make you work through longer half-court trips, and live in that 71 scored, 69 allowed window where every possession feels like it matters a little too much. They are not in a rush, they want bodies in the paint, and they are perfectly happy if this turns into a grind where every cut is contested and every drive finds a forearm or a hip bump on the way to the rim. Sometimes that style wins ugly, and sometimes it just looks ugly, but it keeps them attached in games where more frantic teams might fall apart. Here is the thing, though, some matchups just sit comfortably with one program, and this one has leaned toward Duquesne recently. They have taken the last 3 meetings straight up and against the number, and in the first clash this season they handled Rhode Island 76-61, splashing 12 threes on 27 attempts and still winning the battle on the glass. That is not only a good night shooting, it is a sign that their spacing bothered Rhode Island on multiple levels, stretching the defense and still giving them second chances when shots missed. Players remember that, coaches remember that, and crowd noise tends to quiet down a bit faster when the visiting team starts dropping familiar shots in your building. Duquesne has also shown that this is not a group that needs home cooking to function, with road wins at places like Davidson, Fordham, and Loyola Chicago, all gyms that can get loud and weird when things get tight. They have already proven they can pack that 3-heavy, attacking identity in the suitcase and bring it with them, instead of shrinking into a different, timid version of themselves away from Pittsburgh. Even when the games stretch, their style does not really change, which can be frustrating for opponents that want them to blink first and slow down. So when you put the recent head-to-head control, the more explosive scoring profile, the road toughness, and the spacing advantage together, the stylistic edge quietly leans toward the team catching the points rather than the one laying them, even if the market is trying to call this close. As our first pick for this matchup, the Duquesne Dukes to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Duquesne games on the season tend to live in the mid-150s combined, roughly that 80-76 rhythm, and that is not a fluke, it is tied directly to how they play possession after possession. They run, they shoot early threes, and they keep a green light from deep that puts them in the top tier nationally for made threes per night. Even when they miss, the sheer volume of attempts adds volatility, and volatility is exactly what pushes a total away from the middle and towards something more dramatic. Rhode Island games sit closer to around 140 points combined, but the way they get there is not smooth at all, and that is where things get fun for a total. This is an offense that has already shown both extremes, hanging 93 on Stetson, 90 at Temple, and 85 on Northeastern when the shots are checking in, then tumbling all the way down to 46 at LaSalle and 50 at George Mason when everything feels stuck in mud. Honestly, that kind of swingy profile can be scary if you are rooting for clean, predictable basketball, but it can be very friendly if you care more about the math of points and possessions. When Rhode Island is feeling it, they blow past their seasonal averages in a hurry. And when they are not, they default to pounding the ball, attacking the paint, and living at the free throw line, getting to the stripe more than 22 times in plenty of games. Free throws mean the clock is stopped, the defense cannot use time as a friend, and every foul suddenly turns into an extra chance for the total to creep upward, even in stretches where the offense looks clunky from the field. Head-to-head, these teams have already shown they can land totals in that upper 130s to mid-140s neighborhood, with recent scores of 76-61, 67-55, and 85-71. Those results sit basically on top of where this current total has been set, before you even talk about the fact that Duquesne is playing with an even more confident, 3-happy rhythm this season and will not be shy about pushing pace on the road. Both teams also foul often enough to turn any close finish into a free throw parade, with each side living around 19 to 20 fouls per game, which is exactly how you end up with those late sequences where the last 90 seconds sneak in 6 or 8 extra points out of nowhere. You think the game is over, coaches start playing the foul game, and suddenly every trip is 2 shots and a small nudge to the total. So you have one team very comfortable turning this into a 3-point contest, another that likes to live at the line and has already shown it can stretch into the high 70s and 80s on good nights, plus a history of scores that hover right around this range, which all adds up to a matchup that tilts toward more points rather than fewer. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Ohio State versus Penn State. Ohio State walks into Happy Valley with 2 very different storylines hanging in the air, one team chasing a real path into March and the other trying to keep the season from fading into the background entirely. The Buckeyes carry a record of 18-11 overall and 10-8 in league play, sitting in that packed middle of a brutal conference while still riding the emotional jolt of that statement win over top 10 Purdue where they controlled long stretches and finished strong. Penn State sits at 12-17 and 3-15 in conference, which already tells you a lot, even though they are coming off a feel-good upset of Iowa that reminded everyone they can still swing above their weight when the crowd gets into it and the shots start falling. Ohio State has finally settled into a clear identity, which matters a lot when you are late in the season and every possession feels heavier. The Buckeyes lean on an offense that grades out in the upper tier nationally, comfortably living near the 80-point mark most nights, while the defense usually does just enough, not elite, but sturdy enough that the offense gets to decide how games feel. They have walked through a real schedule, trading blows with names like Michigan State, Iowa, Wisconsin, Virginia, USC, and that Purdue group, so a loud road environment at Penn State feels more like another business trip than some shocking test. Even away from Columbus, they have already shown they can handle the travel, grabbing wins at places like Oregon and Rutgers and staying competitive in most of their tough road dates, which quietly builds confidence in a locker room. The rotation now looks steady instead of patchwork, which is a big shift from earlier in the year. Christoph Tilley is back in the middle after dealing with a calf issue and time in concussion protocol, and his size and presence let everyone else guard more honest matchups instead of constantly scrambling. John Mobley Jr. has shaken off his own nagging problem. You can see it in the way he attacks again, and Tayson Chapman has grown into that energetic guard who comes in, pushes the tempo a bit, and gives them a jolt from the bench. Devin Royal adds another active body in the front court, helping on the glass and on switches, and together this group feels like the version Ohio State hoped to see when the season tipped, not the uneven one from the early weeks. Penn State, on the other hand, has spent most of the year trying to plug leaks while sailing into heavy wind. The record reflects it, but the style does too. A team that can be gritty and annoying to play but that also gives up close to 80 points a night and sits near the bottom of the national charts on the defensive side. They hustle, they scrap, and they have wings and guards who can catch fire, but they also turn the ball over, get bullied on the glass at times, and let opponents live in rhythm for long stretches. Caden Mingo is a good example of their season in miniature, talented and fearless but dealing with injuries and interruptions, including leaving that Iowa win with another issue, and his status does not feel rock solid from game to game. Even with guys like Freddie DeLeon 5, Josh Reed, Ivan Juric, Millie Tunka, Eli Rice, and Dominic Stewart on the roster and capable of having moments, the overall product has been uneven, and that inconsistency is exactly what a focused favorite wants to see. There is also that mental gap, the one you feel even before tip, with Ohio State playing for seeding and their spot in the bracket while Penn State is mostly playing spoiler and trying to finish on a proud note. Recent meetings tilt the story in the same direction, with the Buckeyes taking 7 of the last 10 and the most recent 3 in a row, and those 3 have come by double-digit average margin, including the 84-78 game earlier this season where Ohio State looked comfortable for most of the night. All of that, the cleaner identity, the healthier and deeper rotation, the more trustworthy defense, and the higher stakes, points toward one side being much more likely to create and hold real separation by the time the horn sounds. As our first pick for this matchup, the Ohio State Buckeyes to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Oddsmakers have hung a large total for a reason. They are reacting to how these two teams actually play, not just guessing based on reputation. Ohio State games have turned into track-style nights more often than not, with that offense humming close to 80 points per outing and the defense giving up enough that both sides usually get to breathe a little on that end. Recent results tell the same story better than any fancy chart. Think of that 82-74 win over Purdue, the 89-82 shootout with USC, the 86-69 result against Wisconsin, the 92-82 loss at Wisconsin, and of course that 84-78 first meeting with Penn State, all of them landing in that high-scoring neighborhood. Penn State fits right into that picture from the other side. They typically land around the mid-70s on offense and allow numbers creeping toward 80 on defense, which is not a mix that screams defensive slugfest. Their efficiency numbers sit near the bottom of Division I on that end of the floor, and you can feel it when you watch them. Possessions where they fight through a screen or two, then lose track of a shooter or give up a straight-line drive. When they have their bright nights, like the 71-69 upset of Iowa, it usually comes from hitting tough shots and piling up points, not from locking anyone in a defensive cage. When they struggle, the scores get big fast, with teams like Nebraska, Michigan, and others running the total up without needing overtime, and that first matchup with Ohio State getting all the way to a combined 162 points in regulation. The stylistic mix is pretty clear. Ohio State is comfortable playing at a pace where both teams can run, especially when their guards smell weakness and push off misses and turnovers. Mobley Jr. and Chapman, both very much active and in the current rotation, give them extra ball handling and shot creation, which makes it easier to keep the tempo from bogging down even when the starters sit for a few minutes. Penn State, knowing their defense is not a brick wall, tends to answer by firing back quickly, hunting early threes, and trusting that a little chaos might bother a more talented opponent. That recipe, with one side efficient and aggressive and the other side willing to trade shots and live with volatility, usually produces runs in both directions and long stretches where neither defense strings together many stops. Taken together, it points more toward a game where both teams spend plenty of time in the 70s or beyond, rather than a slow, grinding rock fight that stalls out possession by possession. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.